right, happy Tuesday. My name is Tyrone Gathers Jr., and this is the source of the Inkwell on knowledge, understanding, and wisdom, Kansas City's global community radio station. You can listen to this broadcast in a few ways. You can go to KUAW.org. You can also go to KUAW on your TuneIn device, as well as go to KUAW on Facebook at KUAW-LPFM 985 or YouTube. You can also call in at 816-599-6893 to call in and interact with us, or email us at KUAW985@gmail.org. My broadcast is going to kind of pick up where the Truth Be Told just took off in regards to a lot of racial things. I'm going to talk about a taboo topic that many people do not like to discuss because of the tenseness that it may bring up. But I mean, how can we go forward if we don't talk about certain things? What I want to talk about is just over this past weekend rather, I watched the documentary on Netflix, When They See Us. And just like the majority of the people that I've discussed, it was very difficult to watch. One of my friends said that it was a horror movie for her. She could barely keep her eyes open. And I mean, that was really probably one of the most true, down-to-earth descriptions of it. If you're not familiar with the documentary, When They See Us, it's about the Central Park Five. 4 African-American males, one Hispanic brother, was falsely accused of brutally raping a white woman, and their stories were altered, and they were coerced into taking the fall for something they didn't do. And these brothers spent over a decade in prison. Yeah, pretty much. And it's a grim reminder of what the legal system looks like in this country. I think someone else said that it was a wake-up call for them. It reminded them on how things were. And a lot of the conversation that was had about this documentary was primarily between people of African descent, or people of color. Thank you, T-Baby, 6 to 13 years. The last brother got out of 13 years. I'm not going to ruin the documentary for you. I personally feel that people should watch it, as many as possible. And also, I think people should watch it and have dialogue and discussion. I know one of my friends on Facebook said that she watched it and had her son watched it, and she said her son watched it four times. So that was a definite. I don't know what to say about. I mean, what I can say, I'm glad to see that a young person wanted to look at this, because when I looked at the documentary, the first thing I thought about was my son. I have a black male son. Although he's 3 years old, I saw my son in those young men. I mean, because it was very, very, very heartfelt. It was very heartbreaking. But one thing that really bothers me, and also kind of sheds light on the whole situation, is you have people out here who says that racism does not exist, and privilege is a figment of someone's imagination. And I'm hearing people say this, but then when I watch this documentary and I have conversations with people who look like me, we know exactly what we're talking about. And also I noticed that when I have conversation about the documentary When They See Us, it's primarily people of color. I'm sorry, it is people of color. Now, I posted something on social media in regards to how I felt about it, and I've noticed that none of my friends who are Caucasian mentioned anything about the docuseries. Now, I'm not saying anything negative about it. I want to say that people who are Caucasian may not feel comfortable about discussing the topic of the conversation, because racism is a very, very tense powder keg that we're sitting on right now, and it will explode in a blink of an eye. But I think people do not talk about racism for a number of reasons. The ones that kind of stick out to me is primarily people want to avoid the discussion because it might start arguments or confusion. Or a matter of fact, some people just don't like talking about racism because they don't know what racism is. And I think when I say they don't know what it is, they can't understand other people's perception of racism. For example, and I don't like outing anybody, but however, I do want to bring light to one situation. I posted something about privilege, and a gentleman got on and tried to say that the way I see privilege or the way we see privilege is not how privilege really is. And then I sat and thought about it some more. And if you all are in the Kansas City area, you should be aware of the board president over at the Lee Summit School District. This gentleman's comments were very similar to hers, rooted in ignorance. And also, not only were they rooted in ignorance, it also made whatever discrimination that I felt and the people who look like me or who are in agreement with me felt or observed didn't exist. And that made me very upset. You can feel what you want to feel. However, your opinion should not remove any sense of discrimination that I experience. But I'm going to go ahead and dig in. I want to kind of dedicate this show to this young man because it's obvious he has a very jaded view in regards to what racism really is. So this is dedicated to you. Okay, now, there are a lot of myths about racism that people like to throw out there. And, oh, wait a minute, I got a comment from T-Baby. Should make you want to know your rights and teach. Exactly. You want, kind of scrolling back. That docuseries does make you want to go ahead and know your rights and teach your children. For example, a little rabbit trail. There's a video going around about a gentleman who had his son have his ID and some other pertinent information on a lanyard. And when he got pulled over, he had them put on top of the car with his hands outside of the car because he said he wants to teach his son to properly engage the police so his life wouldn't be as threatened. That's exactly what I'm talking about. Thank you for mentioning that, T-Baby. But back to what I was talking about in regards to myths. The definition of a myth is someone's perception or ideology on how things are. For example, the ancient Greeks had a whole bunch of myths. For example, why are there spiders? One myth about spiders is a woman threatened to challenge a goddess. She lost. The goddess said, okay, you're going to weave for the rest of your life, turn into a spider. So some people actually believe that kind of stuff. So when I say that there are certain myths about racism that people believe that, just like most myths, or I'd say 95% of the myths, aren't true. So I'm going to go through some myths that people may in turn believe that give them a very, very jaded outlook on things in regards to racism. Because the last broadcast talked about integration. And you have a lot of individuals who don't look like each other, who don't believe the same exact thing, or who aren't from the same place, who are in the same area. And when you are the minority, there are things that are said. There's some people who are in the quote-unquote majority feel that it's common speak, but that common speak is rooted in your oppression. All right, first one, myth number one, racism is not our problem. Now, if you've heard that before, raise your hand. Now, the perspective can be seen in the question. Why do we have to talk about that? So when people ask why must they talk about racism, they in turn feel that racism is not their problem. That assumption is that, we feel we're not racist, therefore we should not talk about racism. Now, I come from the belief that what's worse than someone who is an actual racist is individuals who feel that racism does not exist, because you hold off and you do things that are racist, but you feel, okay, how is this racist? Okay, a helpful way to expand someone's capacity to see racism is that everyone's problem is to name some sort of implicit bias that people may not even notice. And when I say implicit and explicit is very obvious. For example, this is a bottled water, okay? Implicit is things that are implied. Well, if I'm thirsty, I'm going to drink this bottled water. So explicit is out in the open. It tells you what it is. Implicit is implied. So a lot of racism that we experience is, in fact, implied, hence the institutionalized racism or the passive oppression that we see in a lot of places of business or organizations. All right. Implicit bias, like for example, pulling your purse closer when you see people of color coming your way. A brother of mine experienced that this morning when he was at work. Feeling afraid or nervous when you're around people of color. Assuming that a person of color might be guilty of a crime. I'll say that again. Assuming that a person of color might be guilty of a crime when they are pulled over or arrested by police. Now, the individual who I'm dedicating this to, there have been several videos of police going very, very abrasive on people of color. And this person would always say, well, what did the person do? I mean, you know, always coming up with that different scenario when it's obvious that something's not right. That's a form of implicit racism. Jumping to conclusions about a person of color stealing something that you may have misplaced. Or feeling the impulse to ask people of color, where are you from? Meaning a different country, when you don't ask white people the same question. These examples highlight the subtle ways implicit bias is still at work. I got another one for you. When you're in a classroom setting and you have children acting a certain way and you label all children who look like that child in the stereotype in which you see, that's implicit racism also. Another way of framing racism as our problem is to identify the advantages that white people may experience. Now, for the individual who said privilege does not exist, let me explain something to you. Privilege is advantages that whites have over people of color. In America, whites have advantage over people of color. Now, let's see, what do we have right here? I had to debunk the myth of white privilege. White privilege does not mean your life is easy. It means your skin didn't make it harder. No, white privilege is exactly what I just got through saying. It's the advantages that whites have over people of color. And that does take place. For example, I strongly suggest you look at the documentary When They See Us. That is white privilege right there in front of you. And white privilege does come down to complexion. Because I guarantee you, if you and I were in a situation, just like Sharon Eichen just got through saying, hitting the locks on all doors when in a black neighborhood, you will experience what I'm talking about. For example, when you look at your communities, don't you find it odd that crime has no address? But don't you find it odd that areas where there are more people of color, that the crime there is more exposed versus areas where there are people who are white? That's privilege. I mean, white privilege is not a myth. White privilege is a fact. Okay. Privileges may be different for whites who experience other aspects of their identity as marginalizing, but there are enough examples that is possible for even the most disadvantaged white person to be able to relate to at least one of them. So we got to take monetary value out of the area. For example, if you look at the book To Kill a Mockingbird, Tom Robinson was accused of raping Mayella Ewell. Now, Tom Robinson financially was better off than the Ewell family. However, when Mayella Ewell and her dad came up with the story to lie that Tom Robinson raped her, immediately their lower status was above him because he was a black man. And then in turn, in that courtroom scene, when Tom Robinson said, and I quote, "I felt sorry for her," the privilege then exploded even farther. How dare you as a black man feel sorry for a white woman? As if, pretty much saying she's greater than you. That's what privilege is. Advantages. All right. Myth number 2. Racism is about hateful actions and words. If racism were just about mean actions and words, then we could easily say this is not about us. We ourselves do not harbor racist beliefs or say racist things, at least to people of color. 2 problems arise from this alleged belief. The first is that it assumes that we are the best judges of whether we are racist or not. Note, I say that again, that we are the best judges of whether we're racist or not. Now, let me explain something to you. If I see, Mr. Walker is behind the booth right now. If I came in, and Mr. Walker wears glasses, if I came in and made negative comments about his glasses, and I got to watch what I'm saying because Mr. Walker is he's owner of the station. If I come in and say, "Hey, Four Eyes," and I'm meaning in a joking manner, but Mr. Walker is taking offense to it, I cannot sit up here and say that, well, he shouldn't get mad. I'm just cracking a joke. Well, I can't sit up here and I cannot be the evaluator of how I'm treating this man. If Mr. Walker tells me, Tyrone, you are offending me, that should be my indicator to stop. Let's see what we have right here. Okay. Let's see. What else do we have here? What did I leave off? Okay. The second is that it misses a whole world of data that shows less obvious factors in racial inequality and discrimination. Now, racism is more than someone calling a person of color by a terrible name. It is also seen in the differences in, for example, what we pay, housing discrimination, mortgage lending, school segregation, and rates of policing and incarceration. Now, I'm going to scroll back earlier. Someone made a comment and said that privilege does not exist. Well, in Kansas City, Missouri, there's a dividing line called Troost. Now, on the west side of Troost, you can get a house. Let's say 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, and a 1-car garage. You take that same house and put it on the east side of Troost with the same amenities. The house on the west side of Troost will in turn sell for a higher price. Why? Because the neighborhood is predominantly white, and there's not many factors out there that attract people of color. That is privilege. See, they'll tell you that it's the exclusivity. I want to be somewhere that's exclusive. Look at all these code words. Now, I have a few coworkers that I work with, and they will flat out tell you in a heartbeat, yes, there is white privilege. And yes, I can benefit from white privilege. I choose not to. That's, I mean, seriously. Let's see, we got some comments. So, of course, it's white privilege. Of course it is. Black means lower class citizen. Quit calling yourself black. Easy fix. Thank you. Let's see. A new report says 91% of black people are pulled over by cops. We've been knowing this for decades. So, think about this. If Kansas City, Missouri just got through saying that 91% of people who are pulled over are black people, you can't tell me that's not black. I mean, that's not some kind of privilege behind that. Come on now, think about that. I tell you, I mean, case in point, I live in Raytown, Missouri. I got pulled over for a tag issue. Okay, I respect that. My tags weren't on my vehicle. I get pulled over. As soon as I get pulled over, the officer walks over to my vehicle. She asked me about my tags. I said, ma'am, I just got my tags renewed today. Here's my documentation that my tags are done. I look over to my right-hand side. I see her partner on my passenger side with his hand on his gun. She looks at me, goes back to her car, calls for backup. Another vehicle pulls up. Now I have 4 cops. 3 out of the 4 have their hands on their weapons, waiting for me to make a move. all because of tags. Now, I understand that other people of color, that other people of different nationalities have issues with the police. But when you live in a city and the metropolis has a report that 91% of people pulled over are black, I mean, come on now. I mean, seriously. Now, I know some of the information that I'm going to give today may cause some tension, but when you give the truth does hurt. And also, sometimes the truth can enlighten you for more understanding. So hopefully you understand where we come from, not know where we come from, because you'll never know what it's like to be a black man, but you can understand what it's like when I talk about certain things. Let's see. I also talked about housing discrimination, differences in pay. I mean, there is discrimination in pay when it comes to gender, and there's also discrimination in pay when it comes to for race. There's a school district where I used to work where there are individuals who have less degree than what I have, and they have higher paying jobs than what I have, and they're white male. There are individuals who don't have any experience, but because they know someone, they have a job over a well-qualified minority. Case in point, there was a position that was open. A gentleman had credentials working in that position, not only in the civilian world, but also in the military world. However, a white male who knew someone got the position. And note, the white male did not have any understanding of the position. So that takes place. I mean, shoot. Look at your president. Does he have any political background? I'm going to stop messing with Trump. Okay. I also talked about mortgage lending. I had a student teacher, a white woman, and I'm only saying this because I don't want people thinking that I'm making this stuff up. She came to me and she said, yeah, I used to work in the mortgage field, and there are actual clauses that are still in effect today that tells you who you can and can't sell your houses to. I mean, why do you think suburbs were created? Suburbs were created for whites to move away from blacks. Mortgage lending, at one time, if you sold your house to someone of color, the depreciation of your house value did, in fact, drop. School segregation. I sat there and said to an administrator that I work with, I said, if our school building was placed in a different zip code with a different demographic of children, all these problems would be fixed. He looked at me and laughed and said, yes, you're right. So he even knows that. I mean, look at it. Look at your school district, and you can't sit up here and say it was the people we elect. I mean, come on now, let's be real. Go beyond that. We all know that if it's a predominant, more than likely, if it's a predominant white demographic around a school setting, that school does not have the same problems as urban schools. They don't. I mean, look at Lee Summit. The majority of their school buildings is either brand new or they got brand new extensions. KCPS, every now and then, they're just now getting new fields. I mean, I'm very happy for those schools, but they should have got those new fields a long time ago. Look at it. Let's see. And rates of policing and incarceration. I already talked about that as well, too. White people may not feel that we have anything to do with these larger problems, but the silence is part of the problem. Case in point, you have a lot of people talking about the Central Park 5. You keeping your mouth shut. I mean, give your input, too. I mean, there's nothing wrong with having a disagreement. I just had a disagreement with someone that I call a friend right here, right now. That don't mean that I hate the guy. He hates me. We just had a disagreement. Sometimes your disagreement can fuel a discussion to bring more enlightenment. I was always told that the neutral party, oh yeah, thank you, brother. The neutral party is probably one of the most dangerous ones out there, because in war, you got to pick a side. In right and wrong, you have to pick a side. There's no in between with right or wrong. So if you're keeping your mouth shut, and and it goes, it's white, black. I mean, I see with black folks too. Like, for example, when we're in our communities and someone goes next door and blows away your neighbor, and you see the person that does it, the wife asks you, who killed my husband? I ain't saying nothing. That's what I'm talking about, keeping your mouth shut. Telling you should not be afraid to spread the truth. Thank you, Spake. Do not be afraid to spread the truth. If you are afraid to spread the truth, you are the problem. You're not a part of the problem. You encompass the problem. The problem is you. When you look in the mirror, the problem is looks just like you. Open your mouth and say something, especially when it comes to our children. All right, next one. I'm sorry, let me continue. Our acceptance of the status quo makes these injustices even harder to challenge. I remember when I was in high school, I asked one of my teachers, I said, if slavery was still legal, would you own slaves? She looked me right in my face and said, yes, I would. I said, well, why? She said, well, it was a thing to do. I didn't want to go against that. That's the status quo. Just because the status quo doesn't mean it's correct. I mean, think about it. For a while, just like T-Baby said on her show, we were seen as 3/4 of a man. That's not true. I mean, that's not right. At one time, women couldn't vote. That was the status quo. That's wrong. So just because the status quo does not mean it's in fact a truth, a right. While racism is certainly seen in hateful actions and words, it is also seen in our interaction and silence regarding the larger social problems that stem from our racist history and continue because of our indifference. Now, I was teaching in a school building one time, and a student made a comment. This student said the N-word. Now, there's a gentleman that I work with, and I got to shout him out, Donnell Fletcher. He mentioned in a post when that I was an inspiration to him. Well, I want to say live on the air that there was a situation that I had with a student. Donnell Fletcher was the only person that I could go to because he was the only individual that understood where I was coming from in regards to a situation. There was a student who was filtering between the cracks, and I went to him and said, hey, look, let's you and I sit down and talk to him because no one seems to understand the future detriment this child is going through. And we sat down, talked to the child, and the child then in turn started to become successful because he understood what was going on and what stereotypical future he was running into because we opened up our mouths and said something. Now, we have another situation where we have young men who like to walk around and students who like to say the N-word a lot. Myself, Mr. Fletcher, and now some new teachers that come, they're into the building, they're now starting to stop that. Now, there was one building that I was in prior to this one where a student, a black male, said the N-word right in front of his white teacher. The white teacher didn't say anything to him, left it alone. Now, I took offense to that. You have the right to tell that young man not to use that word. You also have the right to tell that young man that that's not him. Correct him. It's okay to do that. I was in another school building. A kid said the word, and the administrator said, well, what do I do? That's what they say. That right there was a racial comment. That's what they say. First of all, that word is not a word that just they say. Multiple people in different nationalities and races use that word. We should not identify that word with a certain group of people. That's the problem. This person is an administrator, and you're flat out saying that you are not going to discuss or correct a child for using racial language because that's what they say. Man, I'm going to tell you something that I'm going to say. You shouldn't be an administrator. Let's see. Never be afraid to spread the truth. Silence is compliance. It is. I really think we need to rethink suspensions in schools. Those that need us the most, we send home. Yes, school is the safest place for a lot of kids. I definitely agree with that. I think consequences need to be more, what's the word? Oh, man. You would think I would have the word. We need to be more creative when it comes to consequences with children. And also, schools need to stop disciplining children because, see, discipline brings punishment. I'm sorry. We should stop punishing kids. Punishment brings pain. Discipline brings a lesson. So we need to teach children to learn from their mistakes. All right, myth number 3. Woo, this is a good one. I'm sitting up here talking like one of them old Baptist ministers taking a sip after every phrase. Myth number 3. Only Ku Klux Klan members and self-proclaimed white supremacists perpetuate racism. Ooh, this is a good one. I say this one again. Only the Ku Klux Klan and self-proclaimed white supremacists perpetuate racism. Ooh. It's easy to envision the bad guys when it comes to talking about racism as men wearing white sheets and pointy hats and burning crosses in your yards, or images of young white men chanting blood and soil in Charlottesville, or individuals wearing swastikas or shaving their heads. See, when we think of racism, we are indoctrinated to think that that's the face of a racist, but it's not. A racist can be that little old lady that sits on her porch and waves at you every morning when you walk to school, or that the owner of that favorite deli you like to go to, or the person that's selling you that new pair of shoes at Foot Locker. You know, racists aren't just paramilitary people, okay? Or quote unquote white nationalists. The moment we point away from ourselves, and I'm reading this, the information that I'm reading is from a website, and I'll give you the information from it later. It's an actual Caucasian that actually wrote this in terms of debunking myths. The moment that people realize that there's no such thing as what a racist looks like, that racism can take different shapes and colors and genders, then we become what we say that we're not, based on what this person is saying. And of course, people like to use the Bible to defend their racism. For example, the KKK, when they burn the cross in the front yard, they say, we want to illuminate. You know, they try to use biblical scripture to determine whether or not you should exist or why you should be enslaved. A couple of scriptures. God, I thank you, and I'm not like other people. Luke 18:11. The moment that we catch ourselves making that distinction, that we need to remind ourselves to be more like that tax collector in that story, and asking God to be more merciful on me as a sinner, Luke 18:13, we start to realize that we all, sin, and we all make comments. We all do things that are discriminatory towards one another. Now, there is no such thing as someone that is 100% non-discriminatory. We all say things, or we have said things and done things. So when you sit up here and make it seem like that what you say and what you do is not racist because you're not in the KKK, or you're not a white supremacist, or you're not a neo-Nazi, you're just as bad as them, because you can in turn say things too and do things also. When I see a face of racism, I don't see someone wearing a pointy hat. I don't see someone with a swastika on their arm. I see someone wearing a shirt and tie. I see schools. I see businesses. I see organizations, because what they do is behind the scenes. And okay, someone can get in your face and call your name to your face. All right. Yeah, that's right there in front of you. That's explicit. It's the implicit racism that's the problem. It's the implicit racism that is a scary thing, because things are going on right now to racially hold you back. Because that's what racism is. It holds you back based on what you look like. It's going on right now as you speak. and you don't know who it is. You don't know you don't know where it's coming from, but it's gonna happen. That's the face of racism that I see. I see it hiding behind things that we are told to embrace. For example, you send your kid to the school, yeah, they love you in there, they care for you. Okay, yeah, but think about that though. Everyone that teaches your child does not love your child. Everyone that teaches your child does not love where your child came from. Everyone that teaches your child does not love who your child can become. And everyone that teaches your child is not, is not afraid that one day your child will be greater than them. So that's what the face of racism looks like to me. Okay, myth number 4. Racism has to do with intentions. For example, if I came in and smacked someone on the back of the head, I had an intent to do it. See, if we have no intention of offending someone else and no consciousness of racial bias, then we may feel resentful for being accused of racism. If we are generally good people who feed and clothe the homeless and give our money to the poor, it can feel as if we are being unjustly accused of racism when the rest of our behavior shows moral intentions. So, for example, yeah, I gave money to this homeless man right here. I can't be racist. I have no intent to be racist because I gave money to this person who needed money. Or I got one for you. I can't be racist. I have black friends. I can't be racist. I have black relatives. I can't be racist. I'm dating a Mexican woman. Nah, just because you associate yourself with those things, the intent still can be there, whether it's unconscious or consciously. Unfortunately, great harm comes to others not simply by intentions, but by inattentions. If we are not paying attention to how others are harmed by large social forces that may be out of our personal control, but nevertheless benefit us in unjust ways, or inattentiveness to these social forces, they can be hurtful. Paying attention to the ways racism continues to unjustly privilege white people and disadvantage people and communities of color enables us to see racism in a much bigger than our intentions. I say it again. Paying attention to ways of racism. See, racism gives privilege to whites, and it gives a disadvantage to those of people of color. See, for example, separating intention from inattention means that if we say something that inadvertently hurts someone, we do not need to get defensive. Instead, we can say, "Oh, I'm sorry," or "I not realize that what I said was hurtful," or educate me on blank. One thing that comes up is when people talk about slavery. We need to stop talking about slavery because it happened a long time ago. See, that's no, you can't say that. Or why do they have to act like that when you refer to a room full of black children? Or when you are when it's Cinco de Mayo and you walk into your place of business wearing a sombrero and a characterized Mexican mustache. You don't think that's an issue? I remember I used to, when I worked at Kaufman Scholars, a young lady walked in wearing an afro wig, and she was strutting. And I would say 95% of that organization told her, "You need to stop. What you're doing is offensive." What's offensive about it? I don't see no problem with it. Just because you don't see a problem with it doesn't mean that 95% of your building doesn't see a problem with it. We do things sometimes without thinking, and that was done without thinking. See, we do things because we don't have, just like I said, being inattentive. You wasn't thinking. That's like me walking up into I have a friend of mine that's Irish. That's like me going up to him and saying, "Hey, let's go out to a restaurant," and then I make a very inappropriate comment that's stereotypical towards Irish people. And then I'm like, "Well, you shouldn't get mad. I was just cracking a joke." See, everything's not funny. See, some things will get your butt whooped. See, we can use the experience as a learning opportunity to see from another's point of view. And that's the point I've been trying to make, is seeing things from someone's point of view. Instead of saying that racism doesn't exist or there's no privilege or why are you offended by that? Well, try to see it from someone else's perspective. You know? Like for example, and I know it's a slippery slope. I'm gonna say it, I'm gonna get back off of it. With this abortion law that came out, you got a lot of men and a lot of individuals who are making comments without seeing it from someone else's perspective. Now, I'm not going to sit up here and get off in that discussion, but I do feel that you can disagree about a certain topic. However, if you see that topic from someone's perspective or the opposition's perspective, then okay, it is what it is. You know, I'm not gonna sit up here and talk about you and defame you and say that you are you know, you're going to hell. And I mean, I can't do that. See, heaven and hell was not created by man, but we are always the first one to send someone to either place. And I'm not gonna sit up here and try to make someone feel like I'm damning their soul because I disagree with them. Okay, I see your perspective. I'm gonna move on from it. You know, it is what it is. All right. So we got any more comments? No more comments. All right. I definitely want to thank all of you for watching and all of you for your comments too, because it definitely does make the discussion, more beneficial. Let's see. Myth number 5. Racism is caused by ignorance. We cannot blame racism on ignorance because we perpetuate it even when we should know better. No, we do things. Say racism is only about ignorance denies the ways racism is perpetuated, even by those who denounce white supremacy and seek to work against it. If racism is done by ignorance, why are there still laws that are rooted in racism? They knew what they were doing when they did that. For example, there are sundown towns surrounding the Kansas City area right now. Although the law is not practiced, it's still in the books. That's racism. They knew what they were doing. When that Constitution was written, they knew exactly what they were doing and who exactly they were giving rights to, which rich white men who own land and no one else, in regards to that particular law. They knew exactly what they were doing. So you cannot say ignorance, because it takes a smart person to be a racist. And I say that because racism is in our laws, it's in our education, it's in our ways of life, it's in religion, it's in every aspect of American culture. And a dummy couldn't do that. Someone who was very knowledgeable who knew exactly what they were doing, penned and illustrated what racism looks like in this country. It is a system. It is systematic. It also ignores the fact that racism can be justified and defended by persons who have received many years of education. Scientists have claimed to demonstrate the inferiority of others races to Caucasians by pointing out head circumferences and psychological proofs for the white man's superiority. If you don't believe me, I suggest you look at what Hitler believed. Hitler tried to prove that whites were superior by science and by a cult. So you can look that up yourself. Also, look at the movie James. telling people when you go to church and your minister is talking about who's trying to preach love, but they're using hateful words, you don't need to be in there. You don't need to follow that doctrine. Also, look for those code words too. I sat in a church, and they talk bad about Muslims, and I tell black people, you need to really get your head out of the sand, because when you see people saying things negative about Muslims, and you're sitting right there, there are a lot of things that Muslims do that you do because of the same culture in which you're from. You can have different religions and different spiritual beliefs, and really it's not that much of a difference between the two. They don't want to tell you that. But there are a lot of things that are very similar. And when they're sitting up here telling you to denounce this particular faith based on what people believe, that is hatred. When you got people sitting up here trying to get you to think that all Muslims are out to get you, and they're telling you that in the Christian church, first of all, that's not Christ. Christ will not sit up here and preach to hate someone or to believe that everyone who's over here is against you. I'm going to tell you what Christ would do. Christ will sit down with people who don't believe the same as him and still sit and treat them as brothers. So the individual that I'm dedicating this to, you said some very hurtful and mean things about people who are of different faiths, primarily people who are Muslim, but you want to go and hide behind your Bible. Let me explain something to you. The word of God does not support the hatred that comes out your mouth. So while you're out there quoting scriptures, or make sure you allow yourself to enlighten your knowledge even deeper and see scriptures that prove that what you're saying is in fact wrong. Because see, you got people out here who will sit up here behind a pulpit and say, hey, God's telling me to say this. God's not telling you to hate somebody. No. You can show me in the Bible where he says that. Our faith is not derived on hatred. So when you sit in an area and you allow someone to use religion or spirituality to discriminate, that is some dangerous stuff. Lawyers made cases for separate but equal schools. Children of color need to be in schools that are different from white people, from white children. I mean, in the 1980s, isn't that when the segregation law failed in the 80s? That's like recent. That's crazy. I've worked in school districts that you have more black students than white students, but you have more white teachers than teachers of color. And to see how these children are treated. If anyone sat up there and said that teachers don't harbor any hatred towards the people in their classroom, we can sit down and debate that. Really, it's not even a debate. It'll be a one-sided argument that I win. Now, I don't typically say that because I've actually witnessed teachers, exercise their hatred and their discrimination on children. Why? Because they're children. Like I teach students in my classroom, people pick on kids because kids are targets. Kids are targets because they are more likely not to fight back. Just like I tell those teachers, say that same racist stuff to their parent. You won't do that because that parent will take you up the block and back. Politicians with college degrees have labeled entire countries of black and brown populations with derogatory terms. That sounds familiar. I think the president labeled African nations as S-hole countries. But that's not racist. Even at the highest levels of academia, persons of color continue to experience racism from those who are bearers of intellectual torches. I've experienced racism being the only black English teacher in my district, the only black male English teacher in my district. Yeah, I've experienced tons of stuff. Tons of it. Case in point, I'm sitting down trying to develop curriculum. My ideas aren't listened to or taken into consideration. That's that institutionalized implicit racism. Okay, well, I'm down to about 3 more minutes. I'm gonna do the next 5 on another show. Yeah, I'll do that. But I think this is rich. Now, one thing people got to realize is when people of color expose racism, it's not saying that every white person is racist. No, it's not. It's saying that racism exists, and we need to discuss this racism. Okay, we need to expose it. All right, happy Tuesday. My name is Tyrone Gathers Jr., and this is the source of the Inkwell on knowledge.